Good morning. My name is Rafael Fernandez de Castro. I'm the director of the Center for U.S. Mexican Studies at the University of California, San Diego, and I welcome you all to this webinar, Nearshoring, a Historical Opportunity for Mexico. We're very grateful to our panelists. Sergio Alcocer, the president of COMEXI, will introduce them to you. And let me also thank El Universal, darle las gracias al Universal, al Debate, al Siglo de Coahuila, al Siglo de Durango, al Siglo de Torreón, El Informador, El Imparcial, Frontera, La Crónica, Pulso, Diario de Yucatán, por acompañarnos en esta transmisión. Let me give Mariana Lopez, our translator, the floor, so she could explain all of you how to listen to this into Spanish, and then we will continue. Please, Mariana, yours is the floor. Mariana, are you there? Well, there's an... Yes,
Rafael, there's a little issue. So she's already on the other channel.
Okay, no worries. If you want to listen to this in Spanish, si quieren escuchar esto en español, vayan a la parte de abajo de su pantalla. Hay un botón que dice interpretación y ahí pueden seleccionar inglés o español. Nosotros vamos a estar hablando en inglés, pero todo el mundo lo puede escuchar en ese botón de interpretación en español. Así es que I will give the floor to Sergio Alcocer to introduce to you the panelists. Sergio Alcocer, the president of COMEXI, please.
Muchas gracias, Rafael, y muy buenos días tengan todos ustedes. Voy a hacer la presentación en español para los mexicanos y en inglés para Shannon. Entonces, dado que es nuestra invitada de honor, voy a empezar con Shannon. So Shannon is the Vice President, Deputy Director of Studies, and Nelson and David Rockefeller Senior Fellow for Latin American Studies at the Council of Foreign Relations in New York. So she's an expert in global trade, supply chains, Mexico, Latin America, and democracy. And she's a member of COMEXI. She's a very good friend of Mexico. And she's the author of a very recent book, very interesting book that is called The Globalization Myth, Why Regions Matter. It's a book that is published by Yale University Press, and in which she chronicles the rise of three main global manufacturing and supply chain hubs, which are the European Union, Asia in general, and North America, of course, including Mexico. So I think it's a very interesting book, and many of the, I suppose that many of her thoughts today will be based on her book. And she holds a bachelor's from Yale University, a master's in international relations from Yale University, and a PhD in government from Harvard University. So Shannon, very, very welcome. Thank you very much for being with us. And es mi placer también presentar a Jesús Flores, quien es actualmente el director institucional de Relaciones o Negociaciones Internacionales de Tenaris en México, con un grado en Economía por el Tecnológico de Monterrey, tiene estudios de posgrado en econometría en la Universidad de Manchester y sobre economía y estadísticas en la Universidad de Warwick en Inglaterra. Ha sido funcionario público en diferentes momentos. Quisiera destacar que fue oficial mayor en la Secretaría de Economía y participó encargado de la negociación sobre temas de energía y petroquímica en el NAFTA, en el primer Tratado de Libre Comercio de América del Norte. Actualmente en su capacidad en Tenaris Tamsa, pues ha tenido una serie de participaciones en el US-Mexico CEO Dialogue, así como también representante de Canacero, la Cámara Nacional de la Industria del Hierro y el Acero, en varios comités internacionales sobre la propia industria. Muy bienvenido, Jesús. Una vez más, me da mucho gusto verte. Igualmente damos la bienvenida a Sergio Gómez Lora, mi tocayo, quien actualmente en Washington representa el Consejo Coordinador Empresarial en la oficina en Washington. Él ha sido desde hace muchos años un ferviente promotor del libre comercio de México con la región de América del Norte, iniciando en 1993, cuando participó en el equipo de negociaciones en diferentes ámbitos, finalmente el Tratado de Libre Comercio. Posteriormente se incorporó a la empresa ICOM, que es un líder tanto en México como en América Latina, porque provee soluciones estratégicas o información para la toma de decisiones estratégicas. y pues dada su enorme experiencia, pues actualmente Sergio encabeza esta oficina en Washington, que es por primera vez una oficina que tiene el sector privado mexicano en Washington para promover la adhesión y el respeto o el cumplimiento de los capítulos del Tratado de Libre Comercio del TEMEC con nuestros socios, en este caso con Estados Unidos. Sergio, muy bienvenido, muchísimas gracias, y Rafael, back to you.
Thank you, Sergio. I want to thank our three panelists for being with us. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Jesus, and thank you, Sergio. I mean, and you bring to us different perspectives. And Shannon, you just wrote a book, and let me ask you, are we really living a historical opportunity in U.S.-Mexican relations? This nearshoring, this strategic competition between China and the U.S., does it represent a window of opportunity for Mexico? To what extent you see this, Shannon? And thank you for being with us.
Great. Well, thank you all for hosting this, and thank you for those who are joining. And the short answer is yes, it does present a historic opportunity. And let me expand a little bit on that short answer and why. And I think one thing to do here, let me just start with a little bit of history, sort of where we've been, because I think that helps us understand what the opportunity is today. And when you look at these last 30, 40 years, these are the years of globalization and, you know, the spread of trade around the world. And we definitely have seen a huge increase. But as I look at the economic data, as you look at what's actually happened, what we've seen over these last 40 years is more regionalization than globalization. Yes, there are companies that have gone global and that source from dozens and dozens of countries all over the world or sell all over the world. But more often than not, when companies and money and different people went abroad looking for customers or suppliers, more often than not, they went next door. They went nearby. And in that process, this, you know, these 40 years of the creation of global supply chains, what we've seen is the rise of three big regions. As Sergio said, an Asian one, a European one, and a North American one. And today, those three regions comprise 90% of all trade. So the rest of the world, South America, Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, they only make up 10% of global trade. It's these other places, including North America, including Mexico and the United States, that really dominate this trade. But the other thing we've seen is, yes, North America is part of this, you know, the epicenter of all of this trade and economic activity. But North America, while it's much more integrated and regional and more dynamic than other parts of the world, it is not as integrated as Asia or Europe. Asia and Europe, you know, somewhere between 60 and almost 70% of trade and foreign direct investment and the movement of people happens within the region. When we look at North America, it's only about 40% of the trade and the money flows and the like. And so that brings North America, brings Mexico, the US, and Canada an advantage over other parts of the world. But it also, I think, reflects the disadvantage we've seen and some of the economic challenges, commercial challenges that Mexico has faced over the last 25 years, even with NAFTA, even with the USMCA, because Asia and Europe have integrated much more. And so they're able to make products often that are higher quality and more affordable because they have the economies of scale, because they have specialization, because they have deeper and broader markets and the like. So that's where we are. You know, Mexico and the United States have benefited, but not to the extent of other parts of the world. And so the question I think today is, as we look at the next decade, can you take more advantage? Can these two nations, and let's say three nations, let's include Canada in here, because I do think this is a North American opportunity, not just each country on their own. Can they take advantage of changes that are happening? And I would say right now, there are huge changes underway. There's huge changes because of geopolitics, where people are thinking about producing or changing their manufacturing footprint. There are huge changes because of automation, because of demographic shifts, because of climate change, because of a whole host of regions. So we're seeing right now a once in a generation fluidity to supply chains. CEOs and boards of directors are thinking about where they're going to put their next capacity. Will they move the plants or the manufacturing networks that they have today to other parts of the world? So they may decide to stay where they are, and there's lots of reasons why things are very sticky and not as many will move as often are talked about. But there is a huge opportunity right now for Mexico, for the United States, for any country, frankly, that was left out, including those who didn't benefit these last 40 years. There's a huge opportunity to seize the moment, but many things need to be done to do that. So let me start with that opening.
This is very good, Shannon. Thank you for explaining us that, and it's basically regions. Regions matter. That's part of the title of your book, and indeed you're right. Let me tell all of you that there's a Q&A button in the bottom of your screen. We would like this to be as interactive as possible. So please write your questions. We'll make sure that Sergio Alcocer and I, we will make sure that our panelists will go to your questions. And so please use that button. Sergio Gomez Lora, you're representing the Mexican private sector in Washington. You're looking there at opportunities for Mexico. So where do you see opportunities for Mexico? How's the scene in Washington? Is this, do we have a window of opportunity, Sergio? And give us a sense about, I mean, what is the time frame of this window of opportunity?
Yes, and thank you very much, Sergio, Tocayo, and Rafael for this invitation. Yes, there is a window of opportunity. It is, I mean, I've been following US-Mexico relations for some years now, over 30 years, and I've never seen such a dynamic and a common ground into moving together towards working on a North American effort into strengthening North American supply chains. And the heads of states were in Mexico last month. And I had the opportunity to be there because the three private sectors were there too, which was also something very without precedent. And there was a common message. At least on the economic front, the three leaders were very clear that they want to work into nearshoring. And the three private sectors are there, fully engaging. So I think there is a window of opportunity, Rafael, and we see now this window of opportunities materializing into, we have lots of frameworks to move this effort. There is a political will. We have two major frameworks with the government. So there is a trilateral group that is now created as a result of the NALS to work on supply chains. There was
the NALS is the North American Leaders Summit.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, and that is this meeting in January. So there are specific efforts in specific sectors such as semiconductors, where the three countries agreed to do very specific tasks. But there's also an effort where they're going to try to look at other sectors where this supply chain effort can bring some results in the short term. At the bilateral level, we have also a very important framework that is, again, talking about acronyms, the HLED, the High-Level Economic Dialogue. But the High-Level Economic Dialogue is what President Biden brought back to the relation to really frame the discussion on the economic front. And a key component of this dialogue is supply chains. So, and on our side, on the private sector, Sergio, Rafael, we have this issue at our highest priority. We are working on two levels. On one level is, obviously, we need to continue improving this framework that we've developed in North America and this investment climate that is facing challenges in the energy sector and in others. But we are also working on the sectoral front. We are putting together specific projects on printed circuit boards, on medical equipment. We have mapped the specific segments of the semiconductor supply chain where we can play a role in Mexico. Again, to answer your question, yes, there is a window of opportunity. The climate in Washington cannot be better in terms of the willingness to move this ahead. I will end this comment just saying that if you look at the relation, the Mexico-US relation, you had these two pillars, these today complicated pillars. One, the USMCA, the economic discussion, which is now in a difficult moment because we have all these disputes on energy and corn on autos. And then you have the other pillar that is always very complicated, and today particularly, which is the border, with the immigration and with the drug trafficking issues. So now this supply chain narrative brings a third pillar, which is more comfortable to everybody, which the governments feel more comfortable talking about, and that gives out some pressure to the other two. So this is the climate in Washington, Rafael.
Thank you, Sergio. This is very good. And Jesus Flores, you're in the private sector. The steel industry has been key for NAFTA, for free trade between Mexico and the US. And so what is your take on this? Where you see the opportunity? And again, give me a sense of, how long will this window of opportunity will last? There's already quite a few questions. Then I will ask Sergio Alcocer if he could introduce some of the questions, because thank you everybody for participating in this. And Sergio Flores, Jesus Flores, let's go to you. There's so many Sergios, I'm confused. Adelante, Jesus.
Thank you, Rafael. Well, let me depart from what Shannon mentioned before, related with the regional hubs that we have in the world, and they are impacting in the 90% of trade. So this is a very relevant figure. So in other words, Europe, Asia, and North America. So in other words, we are competing. So we need to compete with the best conditions. And probably I would say that during 2 decades, we haven't had the best conditions to compete with the rest of the other hubs. Asia. So this is one aspect. So another comment is that during the pandemic and during the last year, we have had a new concept or a new situation: supply chain disruptions. So we started to analyze, we started to study the supply chain disruptions. And for example, McKinsey, they say that on average, every 4 years, we will have a disruption, a global disruption, explained probably for pandemics or natural disasters or bellic conflicts, or I don't know. But that means that every 4 years or 4 years and a half, we will have some kind of disruption that we have to face. So as Sergio mentioned before, proximity matters. So that is important. So as we say that, I understand this is historical. I will mention 3 reasons. One, that from a point of view from the sector I work, that is the steel sector, during 2 decades, I have been seeing that China, for example, have been using a different economic model, and this was related to an, I would say, unfair advantage to compete. But now there is a recognition that this has been a disadvantage. So this is one point, one reason. The second one is that we have seen during the last months, I would say last year and this year, we are in February, but we have seen a lot of information. The Biden administration has been working specifically in policies for decoupling from China. So I think that is important, because we have to recognize, or I recognize, or they recognize that we have been competing with some disadvantage during 2 decades. And for example, The Economist 2 weeks ago, they mentioned that, for example, this strategy is is remaking the U.S. economy. And one example is the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIP Act, because it's a structural change of what's happening in the U.S. And the third reason for which I mean is historical what we are facing now, is that the U.S. is proposing a regional approach proposal. So we have three factors that are important to explain that we are facing different kind of conditions, and this is historical from my point of view. I've been participating for 2 decades in the OECD Steel Committee, and I have seen the difficulties to move in this direction. So for this reason, Rafael, I would say that this is historical.
Thank you, Jesus. Let me go to Sergio Alcocer, and thank you for bringing the business perspective from Mexico and you being in international negotiations within the steel sector for the last 20 years or so. So thank you for sharing your experience with us. Sergio, could you share with us some of the questions here? And of course, I would like to ask Shannon, I mean, she's talking about out of these 3 regions, North America is the less integrated one. Why is that? And what we can do to improve this? Because I do believe that if we better integrate, we could be more competitive. But back to you, Sergio Alcocer, why don't you share with us some of the questions, and we'll make this a conversation.
Yes, they are very interesting and several questions. I will post 1 or 2 of them, which are quite related. The first one from Victoria Monreal. She asks, what are currently the main issues that could prevent Mexico from taking advantage of the nearshoring trend? Infrastructure, energy, security. And she also asked, what would be the Mexican state that is better positioned to take advantage and to benefit from this trend? And there is another related question that talks about specifically on infrastructure and related, for example, of the competitiveness of our airports, highways, ports, and things. So I guess the question then is, what are the main challenges that we face in order to take advantage of nearshoring, and I would say perhaps friendshoring?
Shannon, would you like to try to answer this and make comments on this, and then we'll go to Sergio and Jesus?
Sure, no, happy to start. So there are a lot of things Mexico needs to do to take advantage of this, right? The opportunity is there, but it's not just going to happen, or not happen to the extent that it could happen if they don't take advantage. I mean, you're already seeing nearshoring happening and the border full and industrial parks, but the amount of production that is moving out of China or not being put in China, Mexico is not getting its fair share, I would say, and particularly not its share given that it's located right next to the United States. When you look at the inflows into Southeast Asia, to Vietnam, to other countries, Mexico, yes, it's gaining some, but on a relative level, it's not really reaching its potential. And so part of that, I think, are the reasons that were put forward in that question. You know, one is the infrastructure. You know, a bigger and increasingly important part of costs for lots of multinational companies are logistics. Can you move things back and forth? And particularly when you set up complex supply chains that involve numbers of factories, sometimes in different countries, the logistics, the roads, the rails, the ports, the airports, the digital services, and the like, all of that really matters. And Mexico, especially over the last 4 years, has not invested in the kinds of infrastructure that are necessary for manufacturing industries and others to come in, or at least not to the extent that they could have. The US too has been slow to invest, and the infrastructure bill they passed in the last couple of years will help rectify that. There's a lot of money that will go to improve lots of this infrastructure, but that's a challenge, I think, for both countries is investing on that side. The other obvious one is the energy issue. And so any manufacturing company that's thinking of coming that uses a lot of electricity or relies on that has to wonder if they will have, you know, sustainable or consistent, affordable, and increasingly clean energy that they can use to power their plants or their operations, given that the direction that Mexico is going, because that is really vital. And the renewable part, the clean part, is increasingly important as especially international companies themselves have made lots of pledges for climate neutrality and emissions neutrality in the next couple of decades, as have governments worried, they will worry if they're exporting to various governments, particularly EU, whether they'll have to pay taxes if they don't have a clean energy matrix in terms of the production of their products. And then, this is not a new issue for Mexico, but I just heard it again this last week when I was talking with people who are thinking about moving into both investing in infrastructure at the border, investing in industrial parks, but also bringing their own companies. The security issue is always one that continues to be a challenge and a real worry for both investors as well as corporations or companies that actually make physical things. But I guess I'll just step back, one step. I mean, one of the challenges I think for Mexico is a change in mindset from the federal government. And here, what's interesting to me is for many years, the US, I would say, was probably the more reluctant partner of the three in terms of integration, in terms of regional supply chains, in terms of crossing borders and the like. And today, I think it's Mexico that is more reluctant to really engage and sees self-sufficiency as a viable path and perhaps an attractive one from the federal government level. And the US is they think about national security more broadly, is actually more engaged and is including Mexico and Canada and things like the Inflation Reduction Act, the monies that will go to the green transition and the like. So it's that mindset actually that I think is one of the challenges for Mexico. And the last thing I'll say is, the benefit I think Mexico has is one, yes, the federal government matters, but subnational governments matter too. State governments matter, municipal governments matter, and there you can have, very, pro-business and pro-integration governments that can really make a difference. And the other thing in North America, which is different than Asia, I would say, and particularly Asia tied to China, is in the end, these are going to be decisions of private companies. State-owned enterprises do not guide commerce in North America, at least in the actual manufacturing sector, the way they do in China or some other places. So in the end, if you want momentum, if you want integration, which does bring commercial strength, in my view, you don't have to rely on the federal government. You can make huge progress just at the local level and at the company level.
Thank you very much, Shannon. There is another question here that I think is related to what you were mentioning, and it has to do with the rule of law. And I would like to listen from the private sector in Mexico. What is the temperature within the private sector vis-a-vis the rule of law, and perhaps not a very pro-business attitude of our Mexican government? And then this is another question that is related to this is, what is actually doing the Mexican government? What is the Mexican government doing actually to really take care of the nearshoring issue? And because there's a lot of talk, but I mean, what are the real, the objective things that are the Mexican government is doing into this? Are there like tax reductions or tax incentives, or what is being done? Because I don't know.
Sergio Alcocer, I have some questions from the Facebook.
Why don't we just let them answer these questions so that we don't lose?
Okay, excellent.
Could you hear? Sorry, what you said? Me?
No, go ahead, Jesus.
Go ahead, Jesus.
Okay. No. Well, I think rule of law is one of the main concerns, no doubt. And unfortunately, we have USMCA that provides rules and regulations and certainty. That is the idea. So, but it's very important to be analyzing the distortion that could happen in relation with the these rules organization. I think that is one of the main concerns in the private sector. Second, let me say, probably Sergio will add some comments to my intervention in this aspect, but has been very interesting during the last weeks, probably a month, to be working near the Mexican government and to be analyzing options in relation with some pilot programs in order to understand in the practice nearshoring. And we are working in a good way. We are receiving important information. So I believe that we are in a positive way in order to be trying to solve these kind of concerns. That will be my answer, Sergio. And Sergio Gomez Lora, he's the leader in one of these projects. So I think he will be very happy to complement what I'm saying.
Sure. So I think Shannon and Jesus already said the most relevant. I mean, I fully agree with Shannon that this is happening. So the question is if Mexico will take advantage. No, I think as Shannon put it, the question is to what extent. If we will be able to take full advantage, because we are already taking advantage. And let me connect this to what Jesus was saying and share with you one example of what we're doing, so you can sense the kind of challenges we're facing. And I promised to my tocayo Sergio not to use slides, so I will only use one to make sure that we are all talking about the same thing, because I'm going to share with you an example, an effort that we're doing to promote nearshoring on PCBs, on printed circuit boards. So please, Maricel, just, I mean, the first time I talk about this, believe me, I was thinking about a completely different thing. So these are the PCBs. The PCBs is this green board where you have these avenues where you install all the semiconductors, the chips, the capacitors, and all the components that give instructions to move basically everything, from your microwave to an airplane. No, cars, telephones, everything works with this. This is really a key part of the electronic world. So thank you, Maricel. So that is Tocayo about slides. So what are we doing about with PCBs? What is happening in Mexico today, we don't manufacture PCBs. We assemble PCBs. We get the board, we get the components, and some companies that work in Mexico assemble that into a printed circuit board assembled and put it into parts of cars, refrigerators, parts of planes, plenty of things. So what is happening here and why this illustrates the conversation that we have had? Well, first, one of the first questions that Rafael put forward is this an historic opportunity? It is. Why? Because some things different are happening, things that will never happen with our current context. And one is the discussion on PCBs. Why are we talking about PCBs? As Shannon indicated, this is an industry that has economies of scale in Asia, that specialization there, that we wouldn't be able to think about producing them without this current context. So why are we able to discuss this today? Well, two main reasons. One is the United States government decided to put $280 billion into promote the semiconductor industry and depend less from China. And this is the same supply chain. The semiconductors are part of install of that PCB in that panel control board. And secondly, what is going on in Taiwan? Taiwan is the #1 producer of PCBs in the planet. They produce 1/3 of the PCBs in the world. And it happens to be that 60% of their PCB facility productions are in mainland China. This is an issue, as you might suspect. So the Taiwanese industry is now adopting a policy called China +1, which means that they are going to diversify that concentration of PCBs. And before we had this nearshoring discussion, they had 3 markets in their evaluation process to see where they would diversify. Malaysia, Vietnam, and remind me, Maricel, what is the third one?
Taiwan.
No, Malaysia, Vietnam, but there's a third one that I don't remember right now.
Sorry,
which
Vietnam.
One is.
Vietnam.
Vietnam.
Yeah.
Malaysia,
So-
Singapore.
No, not Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, and I'm missing one, but it's my Alzheimer, but Maricel will remind me in a minute. So,
Thailand.
Thailand, that's it. Thailand. Okay, so these two. So then this effort started, the nearshoring happening, this CHIPS Act, and then today, the Taiwanese industry has 4 destinies in their evaluation. And the 4th is Mexico. Because I think for them strategically, it would be a mistake not to have some food in North America in this so very strategic industry for the US. So today, we launched, we talked to the Taiwanese industry. We prepared a first effort. We presented that to the Secretary Buenrostro. She liked that. She said, bring the Taiwanese to me. We brought them to her. We had a discussion, and today we had a working group that I'm learning that is going to be now part of the high-level economic dialogue with the United States. And we are working with the Taiwanese to answer 2 questions. Which segments of the supply chain of PCBs make sense to have in Mexico? And what are the key requirements for the Taiwanese PCB industry to invest in Mexico? And there we're getting into the questions that Sergio and Rafael are saying. We're getting into energy. Clean energy is key. We're getting into water treatment. Water treatment is very important for this industry. And we're getting into rule of law. We're getting into land. We're getting into security. And we have the attention of the Minister of the Economy trying to put together a package that would make sense for this industry to land into Mexico. So I wanted to share this example because it really puts into a specific case the discussion that we're having right now. Thank you.
Rafael, there is one very interesting question, I think, that goes into the elephant in the room, which is China. And then Jose Luis Bernal, who's former ambassador of Mexico to China, asks or says a comment, says, as we speak of the globalization of fragmentation in regions, what is actually happening is a new way of reglobalization. So nearshoring does not necessarily mean building regional fortresses, much less limiting industrial restructuring to friendly investments. Asian investment and technologies, as well as European ones, play a major role in these trends. One question that we need to answer is how to better manage trade links and new investments coming from China in a particular region or to this region. And then I think this goes back to a question that was put in front of us before, which is what is the role of China in all of this? And what is the role of China from the Mexican point of view, and certainly from the US point of view, Shannon? And so it would be very interesting to have your comments on this. Perhaps we could start with Jesus, and then we go all the way to Shannon.
Well, thank you. Let me try to answer different questions at the same time. Try to follow Sergio's intervention, because I believe that one of the main success formula that China and Asia, I mean, Korea and Japan have used during the last years, have been this coordination between the public and private sector. I think this is one relevant point. And this is a challenge, a real challenge. So when Rafael mentioned or did his question about the time frame, probably I didn't answer the question, but I think we need an urgent action in terms of organization. In other words, what I mean, we need a governance in order to be working in the best possible way with this coordination with public and private sector. And the experience that China, Japan, and Korea has in this matter is very important. So we have to learn or to organize in a very important way. So I would say that this is a real challenge. This is a challenge. Why? Because we need a strategy. So we need to construct a strategy of coordination with the public-private sector, but also coordination with the public and private sector in the US. So it's another challenge. So I would say that, and I have the same doubt in relation with China, because China wants to be participating also in this regional hub. I mean, North America. So they want to be participating. They don't want to be a part. They want to be participating in this hub. What is the strategy that we will use in order to be facing this intention, and also having in mind the practices, the model that they have been using for 2 decades?
Thank you, Jesus. I have a question from El Universal, from the Facebook of El Universal, and this is something that Sergio Alcocer already asked you, and let me press you a little bit on this. Is there any Mexican state that is doing a good job in attracting this reshoring? Do you see, I don't know, any one of the 32 states doing something meaningful? And Shannon, I was worried when you're talking about mindset of the Mexican government. What about in the US? Because now, yes, indeed, the Biden administration is launching this industrial policy. But what about it if Republicans come back to power? What about it if Trump is back in 2024? And do you think that that will be the same mindset in the US?
Well, let me start with that. And I think it hooks into what Jesus was just saying about China. And you know, in Washington, you know, the two parties don't agree on a lot, as we all well know. But one thing they do agree on is the worries about suspicions of, if not outright hostility toward China. And I think that really is a running theme. We also see some agreement on this idea that, you know, national security is much broader than just defense policy, that it brings in semiconductors, that it brings in critical minerals, that it brings in green technologies of the future, like electric vehicle batteries, that it brings in pharmaceuticals after COVID and after a global pandemic, that you need to have access to those kinds of industries in places that you trust will share those products with you if you get to the point where you need them. And so what I do see in Washington, there are differences, and if we have a Trump administration or someone else, we will see very different policies, for sure. But I do think some of these underlying themes, this idea in the United States that there should be an active industrial policy, that the US government should be intervening in the economy to guide it in particular directions, I think that's a bipartisan view. Now, they would guide it in different directions. I don't think a Trump administration would be as focused on climate change and the green transition as they would other things. But I don't think we'd see a pulling back of, say, the CHIPS Act that really wants to invest in semiconductors, or in other kinds of, or in a pharmaceuticals approach. You know, one thing that I think is interesting here as I look at where supply chains may go and how much movement we may see is that these things are not just new. They've been going on for a decade plus. And, you know, when I was doing research for the book, I was in China for about a month in 2019, right before the pandemic. And already when I was talking with supply chain managers and companies, you know, they were already thinking of moving part of their production out, or thinking about putting production in other places for a lot of reasons. Some were Trump tariffs, right? It was more costly to export things from China. But it was instead things like logistics, changing wage rates, different access to markets. They were thinking in different ways already. And so I would say these last few years and the heightened geopolitics have just accelerated trends that were there, and pushed companies that once, you know, were doing profits and loss based more on what are my logistics costs, what are my labor costs, what are, you know, my other inputs costs, my electricity and that sort of thing, to add this geopolitical overlay. And there I don't see the next US government, whether it's Republican or Democrat, pulling back. And in fact, I think a few pillars that have been put in place over this last year or two with bipartisan support in the Congress really will shape global trade for the decades to come, and particularly shape the role that Mexico can play. And let me just put one on the table here. So last year, or a year ago, December, we saw the US Congress pass the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. It came into force last summer in June. And this is a really broad sweeping law about forced labor, both in Xinjiang, in the province of China, but any forced labor that happens in China and any goods coming into the United States from there. And as one US-based lawyer told me, they think this will be more consequential for global trade than the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act will be, in terms of changing the nature of where things are made and how they're made. So in that sense, is a long way of saying, yes, we will see a different policy if Trump comes in or if we see a Republican president in 2024 and 2025. But some of these tenets that are providing this opportunity for Mexico, this nearshoring opportunity, I don't see going away, whomever is the next president of the United States.
Let me read a question that Ambassador Tony Wayne, we would like to say hi from here, is posing is a kind of a comment and question. Is in talking with representatives of global companies, a number of them comment how the Mexican federal government does not really have a serious program to encourage them to invest. Some companies, especially in the auto sector, are deciding to invest in any case, but as Shannon mentioned, this is a way below the potential. Much of the work to incentivize new investment is left to the states, and only a few state governments seem to have serious efforts underway. Privately, governors have noted the challenges of working with the federal government, particularly to rely on CFE to authorize additional electricity production to support sizable new investments. So he asked to Sergio Gomez Lora, is the federal government, Mexican federal government, is preparing to seriously change its approach to encouraging investment in various sectors, or just semiconductor, which has agreed ad nauseam?
I think I'm saying hi to my good friend, Ambassador Wayne. I think it depends what you mean by a serious program. What I can say, what I'm seeing today, is that the leadership at the cabinet level that is responsible for economic issues is understanding very clearly the opportunity, and is understanding very clearly that there are key issues to be addressed in order to take full advantage of this opportunity, such as energy. So I think there is we have to remember that we have a government with constrained resources, with a very disciplined in the fiscal front. So if that question means, are there going to be a specific stimulus packages, money for companies that are landing in Mexico? I don't think so. I don't think we're going to see that. We're going to see tax incentives, probably. We're going to see those kind of efforts for this government that is trying to put something on the table. So what I would say is there is a clear understanding at the cabinet level on the economic front that this is a great opportunity, and the Minister of the Economy is engaging into making the investment climate better. With the limitations they have, they're going to do an effort, but it's not going to be an effort compared to what other countries are doing in terms of the resources, financial resources that are put on the table. I think the bet here is that our geography would balance those. And we'll see. I think this is going to be a case by case. And I think for some sectors it will work. And I think some sectors would, regardless of some hurdles on the investment climate, will do significant investment in Mexico. And some others would do only partial what they could do in a different context.
Thank you, Sergio. We need to start finishing because we have 9 minutes left. But I want to post this question, and it's sort of a comment, and let me just provide my comment, which is, I think that the lack of proper infrastructure in Mexico, the lack of energy, the lack of regulatory cooperation, and so on, is because Mexico does not have an industrial policy. And the main difference between South Asia, European Union, and North America is that the Asians developed industrial policies themselves for Korea, South Korea, for China, and so forth. And as Shannon mentioned, there is an industrial policy in the United States, which is called CHIPS. We don't have an industrial policy in Mexico. The industrial policy in Mexico is actually designed in Detroit. That's why we manufacture cars. And naturally now it's going to be designed in Silicon Valley. And now that's why we're going to be developing semiconductors. So that's the reason why we don't have enough infrastructure. And certainly we have not been investing as much as we need to. But the question is, where do you invest if we don't have an industrial policy? So I think the first thing we need to do in Mexico is to actually develop an industrial policy and not to confuse trade policy with industrial policy. Now, talking about investment in human resources, Soledad Padilla, who is a brilliant counsel, our brilliant counsel in Kansas, she's asking about investing in human capital, in North American human capital through training, dual programs, language connections, and how do we depoliticize these conversations in such politicized environments? Is that a role of the private sector to actually push the workforce development and human capital development and improvement? What would be the role of the private sector? And I think this is a significant question because this is one of the agreements that was reached at NALS, that the private sector would have a more important role in human development. So we would like to hear from you on this, and if you can provide your final comments so that we can finish in about 7 minutes or so. So we could start with you, Shannon, if it's okay.
Sure. Well, combining the human capital side and Mexico's search for an industrial policy, I mean, I think as you think about what to do to bring the most here for Mexico is, one is a set of generalized elements that can be useful across all kinds of industries. So you're agnostic about which kind of industry, and that is often lots of infrastructure, it's the digital connections, but a big one is education. And here, you know, as we look into the 21st century, and we're already deep into the 21st century, these workforces that are going to come, if you see companies nearshore, they're not going to be the same factories that showed up in the 20th century, right? They're not going to be about low labor costs. And in fact, Mexico is not a low labor cost place, and it shouldn't aspire to be a low labor cost place. It should aspire to be a very productive place, because then you can pay high wages and you can be more productive, and you can produce more for less if you have high productivity. So education, basic education, as well as more advanced education should be vital in this general aspect. Now, in terms of where to start with an actual industrial policy, I actually think education is a place there too. You need general skills, you know, STEM and other things, but many industries, when I talk to them about moving around the world and where they're going to go, they need 500 workers who have a certain set of skills, or 1,000 workers who have a certain set of skills. And the way, maybe you have a population that has those, but if not, the way you do that is actually very focused education. It's vocational training. It's working between local universities and maybe local governments and the companies themselves. And so I think that is a place where, if Mexico decides they're going to pick 3 or so industries, maybe semiconductors, the testing and packaging or aspects are one of them, maybe the circuit boards are one of them, then how do you design the human capital side of that along, you don't, not just the tax breaks, but the human capital side, so that those industries know that they will have those workers? And, you know, this isn't just a Mexico problem. The last thing I'll say is, you know, we look at Arizona and TSMC and other semiconductor companies that are already putting plants in Arizona. They can't find the workers who are going to be able to work in those plants. So they're setting up training programs. And I think that is something that needs to happen on both sides of the border.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Sergio?
Yes. Yes, thank you very much. And thanks again for this conversation. It has been delightful. I think we should address this working force challenge with a strategy from the bottom up. So my suggestion would be to work through the specific experiences and sectoral challenges and build from there. And let me again give you another example. On the semiconductor front. On the semiconductor front, our first impression was that we would only be able to participate in that segment that Shannon mentioned, you know, the testing and assembly part. Because we are good at that. That's low end, that's no intensive in capital, research and development. That's what they do in Southeast Asia. It made sense for us, at least for a start on that. Okay. when we start digging a little bit more, we found that we are also participating in the design of semiconductors. And there is Intel in Jalisco that has 1,200 engineers doing design for semiconductor for laptops. So when we sat down with them, we asked them how different it is to design a semiconductor for a laptop than a semiconductor for a car or for an airplane. And they said that it was basically the same. So now we are working in a program, in a 5-year program, to train engineers that can do design for semiconductor. And this is being brought to the high-level economic dialogue and to the work framework that the two governments are putting together. When we had the discussion with a printed circuit board industry in Taiwan, one of the key challenges is workforce again. So we are gonna try to develop something similar. So if these examples are successful, then we can go with these examples, with the success story, with the names of the people that were trained, that have jobs, that are participating in these efforts, at least that this in the process of, because these are projects of 4 years, then we can start spreading the gospel and convincing the authorities of the need to make a major effort in this front. So I suggest that we use these examples, examples, to move forward this agenda.
Thank you very much, Sergio. Shannon has to leave, so thank you very much, Shannon, for being with us. And Jesus, you have the final word of this event.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Sergio. I think we have, sometimes we are talking about the same things, but we have different languages in the academic, in the private sector, and in the government. So my point is how to reconcile these language difficulties in order to be clear that we are talking about the same things, but we have to express it in a different way. So for that reason, my proposal is that we need some kind of governance or improve our coordination mechanisms that we have in order to be very pragmatic, in order to answer the firm level requirements that they have and the actions the government is doing and the suggestion that we have from the academic world. I would say that.
Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Sergio, and thank you to Shannon. Thank you, Sergio Alcocer and COMEXI, and El Universal, and El Debate, El Siglo de Coahuila, Durango, Torreón, El Informador, El Imparcial, Frontera, La Crónica, Pulso y Diario de Yucatán. This was a wonderful webinar. We'll see you in a month from now. And again, I mean, this is something that we could stay here for another 2 hours the entire day, because this is a historical opportunity that I do believe we must do it, because otherwise North America will not be where we all expect to be, an integrated region that becomes highly competitive and could be in the benefit of Mexicans, Americans, and Canadians. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you, Jesus. And on behalf of COMEXI and the Center for US Mexican Studies, we'll see you in a month from now. Bye now.